Hello guys and welcome to this latest Battlefield 5 video to come to the channel. Now that the full game has been released, I thought that after getting to know what the final version of the game has to offer, I would take you through all of the launch maps and tell you what I think of them, how they play, and give you some hints and tips that might help you when you come to play them yourselves. First of all though, before I start taking you through the launch maps and telling you about what I think about them, I would like to thank everyone that has come over from TD Barrett's channel recently and subscribed to us. The amount of support that you've shown us is absolutely incredible. He has such a fantastic community and you guys have come over to our channel. You've supported us so much in just a very short amount of time, and I really do hope you enjoy the content we are producing and come to produce over the coming weeks and months. I do hope you choose to stay with us and you find something very beneficial about being subscribed to our channel. Thank you very much for coming over, and we do hope you enjoy what you're going to see. So without further ado, let's get into the Battlefield 5 launch maps, and let me tell you what I think of every single one, how each one of them plays, and what you might want to do when you play them, which might help you with your gameplay. So the first map I'll take you through, guys, is Aerodrome. Just to give you a brief description from the Battlefield 5 website, it is loosely based on the British attacks on German installations, supply lines and airfields in the Libyan desert between 1942 and 1943. Essentially, the map consists of one large hangar, which is where C objective is placed. You then have a barracks area, which is where the D objective is, and then just behind that you have the E objective. The F objective is placed next to a large radio tower of some sort, and then the A and B objectives, which make up the last of the 6 flags, are set closest to the Allied spawn area. Now in my experience, E and A are typically the quietest objectives, and the F and B objectives tend to change hands throughout the game quite a lot. If you have played this map, you will know that C is an absolute mess. I tend to find that Allied forces capture the C objective most commonly, and that means that by the time Axis forces get to the C objective, Allied forces already have a large amount of players in the C objective ready to defend it. This makes it extremely hard for Axis forces to break into the objective and capture that back. Even though squad sizes have been decreased by 1 in this game, it still allows numerous players to spawn on one alive teammate in the C objective, and this usually means that whoever captures C at the beginning of the game, if they're strong enough side, will hold that objective for the rest of the game. So from my experience, this map is actually slightly more biased towards Axis forces than Allied forces, considering that Axis forces have 3 main objectives very close to their spawns, with Allies only having 2. There is a huge lack of cover when it comes to this map. Both left and right hand sides of the map are very flat at times, only rocks to cover you, which can make flanking very, very difficult. Not only when you flank are you exposed to enemy infantry and tanks, but snipers are extremely popular on this map as well. There is considerable elevation change between the middle of the map to the outskirts of the map, and that means that snipers tend to sit themselves around the borders of the map and shoot into objectives, making it difficult for you to make progress. In my opinion, even though this map from the deployment overview seems biased towards Axis soldiers, it actually plays very fairly. I've actually found that Allied forces who can capture A, B and move on to C and hold down C can often make flanks to the F objective and take that back into their control and win over the game. To summarise, this is one of the maps I enjoy more when it comes to the range of maps that we have available in Battlefield 5 so far. Progress is difficult but very rewarding because of this. My advice when you're playing this map is to keep trying. Progress will seem slow, but if you keep going and you keep trying to find ways to get to objectives, trying different ways, cutting across the map, flanking down the outskirt routes, you will find a way and you will be able to draw the battle back into your favour. So now that we've covered Aerodrome, I'll move on to Hamada. Now Hamada is Arabic apparently for a barren landscape of gravel and bare rock, and quite rightly that pretty much perfectly describes this map. I find that the start of the games on Hamada are very, very slow if you're Allied forces, considering that all of the objectives will be in Axis control when you spawn. Now this can make breaking through to A and B objectives very, very difficult, slow progress. You need to wait for the amount of players to build up behind you in order to create a considerable enough force to drive enemy forces back. One of the things that makes this even more difficult is the constant elevation change. Because of the rocky, barren landscape, there seems to be a lot of places where you can get very high and very low. Lots of places to hide, lots of shrub to hide in as well, which makes drawing enemy forces out even more difficult. I'll say a huge thanks to the Reddit user that created this graphic that I'll put up on screen now. This illustrates the size difference between Hamada and maps like Caspian Border from Battlefield 3 back in 2014. If you remember Caspian Border, it was a huge map. You would not want to run from one side of that map to the other, from one spawn to the other spawn, and Hamada is actually considerably bigger. This makes progress even more slow. In fact, the Battlefield 5 website itself says that the map plays slow to moderate in pace, and one of the things that contributes to this is the fact that it's so big. Saying this though, there are plenty of places where you can get around the map quite easily. There are a lot of routes into objectives. Because it's so open and barren, there's no limit to where you can get to and how. Really the only limiting factor is things like elevation changes, where you're literally facing huge rocks and massively tall rock walls which you can't climb up. When it comes to the worst objective on Hamada, or where the fight is centered around, that has to be the D objective. It's smack bang in the middle of A, B and C, which fall towards the Allied forces, and E, F and G, which fall more towards the Axis forces. I find that the right hand side of the map, if you spawn from the Allied spawn, is far less exposed than the left hand side because of how much elevation change there is there. You have a lot of places to run in and out of and hide. The left hand side is flatter and means you're more exposed to fire from A and B. If I have any advice for you guys when you're playing this map yourselves, run a gun which you're confident with at shooting at long ranges, whether that be a DMR, a sniper, or an LMG with a bipod, and focus on flanking objectives, getting behind the enemy. It's very hard to approach from the front on this map. So on to map number 3 in our Battlefield 5 launch maps roundup, which is Devastation. So a little bit of backstory on this map. It's inspired by the second part of the Rotterdam Blitz by the German forces. Apparently the range, trajectory and explosive yield of the bombs dropped by German forces from above reshaped the city entirely. So what you have is a very highly destroyed cityscape, where crumbling buildings and pools of water that have formed from burst drains give a very murky and dark impression on the player when you're running through this map, and make visibility a little bit more difficult than other maps, for example. What I like most about this map is that it's very, very unbiased. When taking a look at the deployment overview for Devastation, you can see that the E and D objectives are pretty much the same distance away from the Allied forces spawn as the A and B objectives are from the Axis forces spawn. C is obviously right in the centre of the map, and that means that the most of the battle is focused around this objective. C goes in and out of enemy hands all the time, and it's very difficult to gain access to C when it's been taken by the enemy force because of how many people can actually stay in there hidden and covered with the amount of debris and devastation that's inside that church area. That being said, because C is such a massive part of the game and where the battle is centred, it means that flanking routes from E around to B and vice versa, as well as D around to A and vice versa, are quite popular. I find that if I'm an allied force, I tend to float around the E and D areas, going back and forth between them, and if I see that there's an opening to capture C, then I will head in there and then come back out to E to cover any forces coming from B. From the E objective, you have a fantastic line of sight to B, both on the flanking route and on the main road that runs down the side of the church. From my experience playing this map so far, I find that shotguns are very popular if you want to hang around the C area. If you want to be inside the church, you want something that's going to hit hard and first time. You want something that's going to be able to handle close range. So if I make any recommendations for guns in this area, it's going to be shotguns and submachine guns like the Suomi, who have a very high rate of fire. If you guys are looking for a little bit of advice on how to play this map, what I would do, depending on whether you spawn as an ally or an Axis force, is work your way through both closest objectives to you. Often these two objectives tend to change hands quite a lot, especially if you're an allied force, which means you can go back and forth between E and D all day long and earn plenty of points there. Obviously, due to the landscape and the amount of rubble and debris that's around, you can often find that enemy forces will wait for the objective to be captured back, and then they will move in. So you can float around these areas even if the objective doesn't seem like it's going to be captured, and you can often pick up kills this way. Now for the fourth map in our roundup, which is Rotterdam, which is also set in Holland, the same as Devastation. Rotterdam is described by the Battlefield 5 website as being an urban environment decorated by canals, tall buildings, and a marketplace that no longer soothes pedestrians but preludes close-quarter firefights. Now Rotterdam was obviously one of the two maps that we got to play when the beta for Battlefield 5 was released. Now this tells me that DICE were very confident about releasing Rotterdam to the public. It's a map that in my opinion works extremely well. Again, much like Devastation, it's very unbiased and it allows each team to express their capabilities to try and win the match. So when you take a look at the deployment overview for Rotterdam, you can see that both Allied forces and Axis forces have objectives that are very equidistant to them. So for Allied forces it's A and B, and for Axis forces it's E and D. Now interestingly on Rotterdam, even though the C objective is set right in the middle of the map, not a great deal of the fighting actually takes place here. In my experience, and I find that this is the same with other people's experience as well, a majority of the fighting actually takes place between the B and D objective. This actually hugely benefits the more creative player though, because it means that the E, C and A objectives are less protected. Now given the spawn locations of both the Axis and Allied forces, routes to A, C and E are all extremely easy. You often find that while the majority of fighting will be going on at B and D, the E, A and C objectives will be changing hands constantly, far less than that of B and D. There is one negative I find with this map though, and that's the camping problem that it has. This is most prominent I think on the A objective because it has the railway line running right across the top of it. If you get 2 or 3 squads of enemies just sitting above the A objective on the railway line, the only way you can get to them is up the stairs, and you know that when you get to the top of the stairs you're just going to be cut down by hordes of machine gun fire. Sniping is also a bit of a problem if you're an infantry soldier on this map. You can use the entire stretch of the railway bridge right from one end at A across to E. They can use themselves to spawn in other players to attack specific objectives and provide suppressing fire for when players are advancing on certain objectives. When I play this map I tend to run a light machine gun or SMG of some kind, usually something more laid back when it comes to SMG though, like the Sten gun. I need the ability to shoot at long ranges and short ranges. I need to pack a punch both up close and far away. One of the things that makes Rotterdam a great map though is the size. It's not too big, but it's not too small. There's plenty of travel distance between objectives, but there's also plenty of opportunity for people to set up and take an objective before they encounter an enemy force. I really enjoy this map, I enjoy how unbiased it is, and I enjoy how creative as a player I can be to capture certain objectives. Okay, so the next map we'll touch on is Arras. Now this is one of the 2 maps that's set in France, and the description on the Battlefield 5 website of Arras is that you'll fight in villages, across fields and along a river on a map designed to bring those rural, Europe-based World War II fantasies to life. Now for me, both visually and the way it plays, Arras is one of the best maps in Battlefield 5 right now. D and A I find are very popular objectives to flip between. They often switch hands throughout the game numerous times, and because of their close proximity to each other, it means that Allied forces regularly take D back after Axis forces have flanked round, and they then often push towards A whilst Axis forces head around the other side of them. In fact, I've had a lot of good games on Arras where I literally go between D and A all game long and very rarely visit any of the other objectives. F and C are both very interesting objectives. They're very different to what I'm used to playing in Battlefield. The fact that they're set in fields makes them very, very unique because often players can hide right on the outskirts of where you can capture the objective from and lay down in the grass, and it makes them very, very hard to see. However, it's very easy for them to see you when you're on approach to the objective. E is obviously the objective that's set right in the middle of everything else, and that means that the majority of the fighting does happen here. It also is where the majority of the strong cover is. However, you have to be careful with attacking the E objective, because even though you do have so much cover to attack it, destruction is very, very common here. I often find that enemy forces roll up with tanks, and just completely cut through all of the cover that's available around E, leaving all of the buildings in rubble and dust, and it means that you have to very carefully pick through where you're going to place yourself and where you will be shooting. Again, touching on a previous point, the long grass and corn is a very interesting aspect of this map. It means that flanking routes are actually really common. There's a lot of natural cover to use, and even though bushes are not solid in the game, you can actually use them as extremely good cover. You can get into your crouch run position and you can often make it from one objective to the other without being seen too easily. Like the previous map, Rotterdam, Arras is very small in terms of its size compared to the other maps on Battlefield, and that's what makes this map quite fast paced. Even if you're only going to visit the outskirts objectives like D, A, F and C, it means you will encounter a very fast paced battle, and very often as soon as you leave an objective it will start being captured by the enemy once again. When it comes to this map, I recommend rolling with an LMG or assault rifle to handle medium to long range distances. If you're the kind of guy that likes to work in and around the more aggressive areas of the map, then definitely go with an SMG or shotgun and float yourself around the outskirts and interior of the E objective. Alternatively, if you're more of a slower player and you like to position yourself someone with a sniper or a DMR, objectives like B and D offer great elevation, which makes enemy players far easier to see when they're on the attack. Twisted Steel is the second map that is set in France, and much like Arras, it shares a lot of the same characteristics. Twisted Steel is set to be heavily inspired by the events at the fortified sector of the river Escaut in 1940 on the border between Belgium and France. Now, when you take a look at an overview of Twisted Steel, you can see that it's one of the larger maps that is available to us in Battlefield 5, and it's made up of 7 objectives, which is obviously far more than some other maps at more like 6 or 5. Now, even though there are a large number of objectives on this map to capture, I often find it's very hard to break past the middle point of the map. Forces seem to spread themselves fairly evenly, and waves of enemies from each spawn seem to come quite consistently. From my experience playing Twisted Steel, the B and E objectives seem to be where the centre of the fighting is set. However, the outskirts of the map also offer some really good opportunities for points and fighting. This offers a great opportunity for not only snipers sat on the B objective on the bridge to cover an assault by enemies from C to A, but also on the offensive from A to C. This is the same situation with the D and G objectives. The distance between them is quite short, and the distance where you can capture them from is quite large, and that means that a lot of the fighting is centred around these two as well. When you're on approach to the D objective and it's in enemy hands, it's a pretty exciting and nerve-wracking experience. You know that there's enemies out there, you just cannot see where they are, and at any second LMG fire or sniper fire could just plain cut you down. Because of the relatively large distance between flags on this map compared to other maps, you have to push enemy objectives at the right time and in the right way in order to make these advances stick. The large amount of water on this map compared to other maps also makes things interesting. With the river running directly under the B objective, it allows players to jump off of the bridge at B and then swim to either C or D, which obviously makes for very difficult defending if those objectives are in your hands. It's a very exciting and immersive map to play. So guys, we've got 2 maps left in this map review of Battlefield 5, and the next map we're going to touch on is Fjell, and I do hope I'm saying that right, Fjell, and this map follows the fight as the Axis forces retreat into the cold, unforgiving peaks surrounding the port city of Narvik. Narvik obviously being one of the other maps that we're very familiar with. Now, I'm going to be honest with you guys and just get it out of the way straight away. I am really not a fan of this map. In fact, it's my least favourite map of the 8 that we get to play right now. Now, I'm not quite sure as to why this is, because there's a lot of very good things about this map. However, it just doesn't seem very smooth when you're playing it. I haven't had a rewarding game on it so far. It seems to be very up and down and unforgiving and unrewarding, quite frankly, when you play this map. However, when you look at the overview, it's actually very fair. The D and E objectives are set about the same proximity from the Axis spawn as the A and B objectives are set from the Allied spawns. And then between those 4 objectives you have C, and that's obviously where the majority of the fighting is centred, where the majority of the cover is for people to get dug in and defend it. I've found that D and B often change hands between Allied and Axis forces quite commonly. Now this is probably to be expected, as from my experience they are the least popular objectives of the 5. However, they're separated by this huge expanse of open snow, and that means attacking from either side is very, very difficult. You often come under fire from LMGs, snipers and DMRs looking to defend the opposite objective. There's only a few ways that you can actually attack an objective, and this leads to what I like to call funneling. Now I don't know if other people describe it as that, but this basically means that there's a certain point where enemies will be coming from. Picture yourself already in control of an objective. If you know that there's only 2 places that enemies can pour in from, you can just train your gunfire on both of these places and simply wait for them to arrive. Wait for them to funnel into the objective. Now because this map is made up of many mountain passes and beaten tracks, it means that you can essentially know exactly where the enemy is going to come from depending on what objectives they have captured at that time. Once people are dug in on an objective, it's very hard to gain control of it once again. 64 players spread across a map with only 5 objectives of this size make for a very fast playing map, and often you'll make your way into an objective only to be immediately killed by some sort of explosive. Ultimately, I think if you're going to have a rewarding experience on this game, it means you need to play in a squad. You need to have 4 people heading into an objective at any one time, and you need to have the ability to spawn on people in order to gain access to those objectives. Now, along with many of the other maps in Battlefield 5, this map changes during the course of the gameplay. A storm blows in at some point during the game. It might be right at the start, the middle or the end, but it reduces visibility dramatically. Even though this is a very fast playing map, if I'm going to give you guys some advice, it's actually to play it quite slowly. Really think about what you're doing, think about where the enemies might be when you're approaching an objective and where they might be moving to, so you can cut off their escape or advance and take control of the objective you're capturing. Now for the 8th and final map, which is of course Narvik. Narvik is a map we are very familiar with. It was one of the 2 maps that was available to us in the Battlefield 5 beta. We've had a lot of practice at it, and undoubtedly DICE were very confident in releasing this map to the public because of including it in the beta. Essentially, Narvik is explained as a place where the Allied and Axis troops skirmish for control of a strategically vital location rich with iron ore transported by the city's railway. And the railway is obviously very critical to this map, with the F, D and B objectives all being set around that area. I think there's only one aspect of Narvik that I don't really enjoy, and much like Rotterdam, that's the multi-tiered gameplay experience. Now what I mean by this is, with the B and D objectives, they can be captured on multiple levels, and it's actually 3 levels in particular. For the B objective, for example, you could be on the top section of the railway, the middle section of the railway, or you can actually be on ground level and capture this objective. This does, however, provide a challenge for a lot of players to clear enemies from multiple levels and gain access to objectives. A, B and D seem to be where the majority of fighting is centred, which is interesting considering that all 3 objectives are actually closer to the Allied forces spawn than the Axis forces spawn. They do, however, all provide extremely great cover for people to get dug in and hold the objectives down. F and E seem to be the quietest objectives of the 6 on the map, and again this is an interesting point too, because these are the 2 objectives that are placed closely to the Axis forces spawn. It seems almost like the majority of the fighting for your team takes place on the opposite side to your spawn. Now Narvik is obviously one of the 2 maps in Battlefield 5 that feature a large amount of snow. I touched on snow in the Fjell 652 map. It's a difficult thing to approach. It's obviously great for when you want to camouflage your player. If you're the kind of player who's confident to stay alive for longer periods of time, then you will undoubtedly receive a benefit from being alive for longer, because you will be more blended into your environment. However, for a player that's just spawned, this can be rather frustrating, as if you're heading into an objective that's been in enemy control for some time, the likelihood is you're not going to be able to see everyone very clearly. If I had to give you all some advice on how to play this map, it would be play it however you want it. If you want to be a sniper, if you want to be a DMR guy, if you want to be LMG, there's plenty of opportunity for every class to be effective on this map, and that is why I love it so much. So guys, that wraps up my review of every map that is available to us in Battlefield 5 right now. I do hope you enjoyed the video, and I do hope you're enjoying the game as well. I'll take this time to apologise for the fact that we haven't had much Battlefield 5 content going up since the release of the full game. Our attention has been at the moment on other series coming to the channel, but we will start bringing Battlefield 5 content back to the channel as soon as we can. Do leave a like on the video if you enjoyed it, guys. In the future I'm actually going to be doing a breakdown of every map in far more detail and giving you guys some more in-depth details of how you can play it, what guns might be useful, and ways you can attack certain objectives which might help you become a more successful Battlefield player. So do subscribe and stay tuned to the channel for upcoming Battlefield 5 videos that might be relevant to what you want to work on. Thanks for watching, guys, and we'll see you in the next one.